Poor Atari. They just couldn't catch a break after the 2600. The 5200 failed. The 7800 failed. The Lynx failed. The Jag failed. But they didn't just make game consoles, they actually made some rather successful computers too. As soon as the VCS was finished in 1977, Atari started development on the next Atari system. This eventually became known as the Atari 8-bit computer line, namely the 400 with 4K of RAM and the 800 with 8K of RAM. As was pretty standard for the time, they were very heavy and large machines, made to look similar to a typewriter, but were surprisingly very capable. In fact, with a little bit of an upgrade, they provided the basis for the Atari 5200, and essentially were the same machine. Awesome graphics, better sound, just an overall improvement from the 2600. While the 5200 was a huge, unnecessary beast with a horrible controller, the 8-bit computers were the same thing, just awesome. I will admit that I am an absolute sucker for compact computers, such as the Commodore 64, Apple II, Tandy 1000EX, the Sinclair Spectrum, and so on. So the Atari 600XL was another object of my lust initially. I honestly never planned on getting one, but one happened to come across my path for a decent price, and so I foolishly gave in and bought one. No, I'm just kidding. It was a good idea. There are plenty of Atari 8-bit computers, but I will be focusing on the XL series here. After the success of the 400 and 800, Atari released the redesigned 1200 XL in 1982, which had more RAM and was designed differently, but it pretty much failed for a whole list of reasons, not the least of which being that it was not fully compatible with previous software. Then in 1983, the 600 XL and 800 XL were announced. These were essentially the same machine as the first 8-bit computers, but with the smaller 1200 XL design and footprint, built-in BASIC, and more RAM. Originally, the 600 XL had 16K of RAM, and the 800 XL had 64K. I paid about $60 for my 600 XL.
$60? You gotta be kidding me.
I am not kidding. For $60, I got a very nice condition 600 XL, the accessories that I needed to run it, a serial PC connector, as well as the upgrade of 64K of RAM in here. In fact, the 600 XL and the 800 XL are basically the exact same machine, it's just that the 600 is a little bit smaller, originally had less RAM, and does not have a monitor output. It's also just a little bit harder to find than the 800 XL. You will also need the 40-watt power brick, as well as some way to hook it up to your TV, preferably one of these kind of cables. Other ones, like the ones that work on the 2600, function well enough, but I get a lot of interference. The screen just looks horrible, so get one of these if you can. There are 2 joystick ports, and those are the same as the 2600, so anything that works with that will work with this. If you want to do much more with the computer than what it comes with, you'll need one of these. This is the SIO cable. This is needed to hook up anything else to the computer, like a disk drive or a cassette player, printer, things like that.
It's really stiff.
I don't currently have a disk drive, but it does use its own cartridges. Any of the 8-bit computer carts should work with it from the 400 up to most of the XE system. My eyes get lots of enjoyment from these original cartridges. They're tiny. And absolutely hideous. Why are they brown and yellow? That's the late 70s for you. And that is why it is Boss. There are hundreds of games to choose from, many of which appeared on other Atari consoles, like the 5200, or were slightly upgraded from the 2600 versions. In fact, several are direct ports between the 8-bit computers and the 5200, since they're basically the same machine, except that you can use a real Atari joystick on the computer and not have to use that freak that comes with the 5200. Compare Frogger on the 5200 with Frogger on the 8-bit. The same frickin' game, except that you can actually play it with a real joystick. What sucks, though, is that the games are not cheap, at least compared to other Atari systems. Even the most common games tend to go for about $5 each, with many being $10 to $20 or even $30 or $40. And these are loose cartridges often. Finding a lot of games together is also rather uncommon, so you won't be getting a huge collection really quick, unless you just get lucky. Quite a few games come on cartridges, but many, many more came on floppy disks, or even on cassette, especially in Europe. Unfortunately, I can't show you how to load a floppy, but really all you do is stick it in there, turn the computer on, and it loads the game. Same thing goes for cartridges. For the most part, the games hold to really high standards, perhaps the result of not taking as many risks on this system. Of course, Atari's own games are great, like Pac-Man, which is infinitely better than the 2600 version, Pole Position, Galaxian, Missile Command, Star Raiders, Joust, Donkey Kong, and the list goes on. Third-party games usually don't disappoint either, and are of much higher standards than what the Atari 2600 was doing at the time. Games like Popeye and Frogger from Parker Brothers play very similarly to the 2600 versions, but have much better graphics and sound, and sometimes even better gameplay. As far as graphics and sound go, many of the games are on par with what the Commodore 64 is capable of, which is absolutely amazing considering the technology is years older than that machine. These are a few notable games that I highly recommend. Now, I mentioned the SIO port earlier, which you can use for a disk drive, but you can also use it for other things, such as this SIO to PC serial device. With this, you can pretty much play any program for the computer using a newer computer with a serial port. There's also a USB version of this thing. With this, you can do all sorts of stuff, like emulate a disk drive with your PC, or directly connect the two computers. All you need to do is plug the two together, choose a disk image, turn on the Atari, and it loads the image like it would be a real disk. So this is great for me right now since I don't have a disk drive yet. Plus, you can also try several games that you normally might not be able to get a hold of. There are also emulators for the system, such as Atari 800 Win Plus, but I'm not particularly impressed with them, mainly due to sound errors and some of the colors just being a little bit off. Of course, it's still a good way to get a good feel for the system before you buy it, but if you can get a hold of the real thing, it's very much worth it and surpasses emulation by far.
So it all pretty much comes down to the question of whether or not an Atari 8-bit would be completely worth buying or not. Well, the answer to that from me is absolutely. An 8-bit computer is completely amazing because of everything that I just covered. Is an Atari 600 XL itself worth purchasing? That maybe not so much, just because of the price. I find it a little bit hard to justify that. I just happen to find a decent deal, so I'm like, why not? You can get an 800 XL or even an 800 for usually a better price than $60. So if you can do that, I would say yes, because of the cost of games and everything, it really starts to add up really quick. So, yes, get an 8-bit Atari computer if you ever happen to run across one. If not, stick with your 5200 and suffer.